and the missing middle housing study. I'd like to share a few logistical points for those members or commissioners participating remotely. We have one commissioner who will be participating remotely. Tonight's meeting is available as a broadcast with closed captioning on Comcast Xfinity channels 25 and 1085, Verizon Fios channels 39 and 40, and the county website. Audio of tonight's meeting is available via phone. If commissioners, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. For our other presenters and speakers joining us through Microsoft Teams, please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Please turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference, and please keep your cameras off until the clerk calls on you to speak. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon, which is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. Once you have spoken, please turn your camera off. If you are dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. Public speakers, you will be called upon by the clerk at an assigned time. Pre-registration to speak at tonight's meeting was required. We are not able to accommodate additional speakers. All speakers will have 2 minutes to comment as individuals. Of speaking in person, there is a timer on the podium that will display your remaining time. If you are dialing in by phone and unable to see the screen, we will provide an audible warning when 30 seconds are remaining. You will be muted when your time has concluded. Tonight, we will be hearing from all registered in-person speakers and one scheduled virtual speaker. All remaining speakers will be heard on Wednesday, March 8th. The meeting chat is active for presenters or commissioners who need technical assistance only. Please do not use the meeting chat for discussion, public comment, question about agenda items, or requests for more information. All public comment must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. Ms. Johnson, I don't know, is Ms. Johnson, can we call our first matter, please?
Can you all hear me? Okay. Our first item for the evening is the proposed resolution pursuant of Code Virginia to amend our zoning fees, our zoning schedule fees. We have Alexis Guild, our budget analyst of DCPHD, to discuss this item with us this evening.
Thank you, and I'd be remiss if I don't say welcome back, Ms. Johnson.
Oh, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alexis Guio. I am the Management and Budget Specialist for CPHD. And as part of the FY24 proposed budget, the county manager recommended to the county board the following changes to the CPHD development fees: an inflationary increase of 5.2%, an increase to the indirect cost surcharge associated with inspection services fees of 6%, the establishment of an indirect cost surcharge associated with zoning fees of 21%, and technical corrections associated with plumbing fees and a fee exemption. The 5.2% inflationary increase is associated with the Employment Cost Index, otherwise known as the ECI. This ECI has been applied to the CPHD development fees in prior years and ensures that the fees keep pace with the annual increases associated with the cost of salaries and benefits. The recommendation for the 6% increase to the inspection services indirect cost surcharge and the establishment of the 21% indirect surcharge on zoning fees is associated with the annual payment of indirect costs the development fund pays to the general fund for work other departments do to further support the activities of the zoning and inspection services divisions. These changes to the indirect cost surcharge will collect the revenue necessary to cover these increasing costs. The technical corrections to the plumbing permits aims to decrease customer confusion, and the fee exemption is associated with the Washington Area Transit Authority and the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority. This concludes my reports. Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you very much. Ms. Johnson, are there any speakers? Thank you very much. The matter is with the commission at this point. Given the kind of directions we're thinking about for this evening, I think I'm just going to open it up to see if there's any questions by any commissioner. Any questions? Ms. Peterson.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I had a question about that I emailed earlier today, and not too much time has passed, so I wouldn't have expected a reply, so I'll ask tonight. Thinking about the conversation we're having later this evening with the missing middle housing, if that in part or in whole ends up getting approved, what are we thinking, how much would this actually impact an individual who wants to redevelop their own single-family home in order to age in place? What would this inflation actually look like, as an increase, and how much they would have to pay for fees?
Sure, and I will answer the part that I can, and in the parts that I can't, I will refer to Matt. The zoning fees and inspection fee schedules that are on the website and are public are associated with all permitting and all zoning issues. The increases for the indirect cost surcharge and the increases associated with the indirect cost surcharges are only to the zoning fees, and the inspection services division fees, they are not applied to the planning portion of those fees. That's number one. Number two, the 5.2% increase is applied to all of them, both planning, zoning, and inspection services. The increase for the employment cost index is a surcharge we do apply. We've applied, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 times out of the 5 or 6 years. Over a year or two, we just for the county manager's budget purposes were not applied to the fees. But it is an annual increase that is necessary to keep up with just the pace of paying people to do their jobs. So that's that part. The indirect cost surcharge, as I stated, are fees that are associated with paying back the general fund on the development fund side, which is inspection services division and zoning division. Those divisions pay the general fund annual lump sum for the work done by other departments to help that fund do what it needs to do. So that is, again, an annual cost that is paid, that is absorbed by the development fund fees, which again is the zoning fees and the inspection services divisions. And that is paid back to the general fund for that work. There has been a surcharge, the 15% indirect cost surcharge has been applied to the inspection services. And so that has been there since the inception of the fund, the development fund, in 2008. The increase, of course, is just to, the purpose of the fees in the development fund are to pay into the development fund the fees that are collected from people doing work to pay for it to do what it needs to do. So the increases that are associated with these proposed increases are just to pay the money that is necessary to run the fund as a whole. So these are increases associated with that. None of these are new fees. They've been there for a while. The zoning fee on the indirect cost surcharge was just unfortunately missed when the fund was inception in 2008. But there are no new fees. These, again, are just slight increases to the current fees that are on the schedules, both of them. I do not have the information as to how much it would impact a residential customer, but it's not only for residential, it's for commercial, residential, anyone doing any work on anything that requires a permit.
And are there any fee reduction programs available if the fees are cost prohibitive? I'm just imagining a senior citizen who does want to age in place, wants to adjust their home so that a second family could live in it to help, offset some of the increase in inflation that everybody is experiencing. So are there any fee adjustment programs?
At this time, I am unaware of any. If you know of any, there are none. And again, the same person would have to pay these fees without these increases. They have to pay the fees to get the work done. So at this time, we do not have, to my knowledge, any fee reduction programs in place. Sure.
Any additional questions? Commissioner Ware.
Thank you. The staff report says that this is a county board agenda item for the meeting of April 22. I just want to confirm that that's correct and not a typo.
Yes.
Great. And only asking, of course, because usually, we hear things in the same month, and we usually announce for the record when the items are going to come before the board. So thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Okay, so time for a vote. Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I need a motion.
Yeah. What are we
We're
voting
so
on?
quick to go. Commissioner Weir. Can I get a motion, please?
Of course. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board adopt an inflationary increase of 5.2%, an increase to the indirect cost surcharge associated with inspection services fees of 6%, the establishment of an indirect cost surcharge associated with zoning fees of 21%, and technical corrections associated with plumbing fees, and a fee exemption set forth in development-related fee schedules of the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development, and Department of Environmental Services, as set forth in attachments A and B to the March 1, 2023 draft staff report effective July 1, 2023.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Sarli. Okay, any discussion, any further discussion? Wonderful. Okay, now, Commissioner Bagley.
Aye.
Commissioner Gearin.
Aye.
Weir.
Aye.
Peterson.
Aye.
Sarli.
Aye.
Lantelmi.
Aye.
Ms. Martin, Ms. Johnson, is Commissioner Hughes on? Oh, Commissioner Hughes?
Aye.
Okay, so and Commissioner Patel. Aye, so the motion carries 8.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
as
Oh, I'm
Commissioner
sorry,
Schroll,
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll.
I also vote aye.
Thank you. All right, so the motion carries 9-0. Ms. Johnson, the second matter, is there a second matter for us to hear?
Okay. Item number 2 is a zoning ordinance amendment to enable the establishment of stormwater management facilities on public lands and to provide increased flexibility for the location of public space amenities and features within required setbacks. This is ZOA-2023-03. We have Nick Rogers, our planning staff, to present this item this evening.
Good evening, good evening, Mr. Rogers.
Chairman, members of the commission, good evening. I am also joined by 3 colleagues from the Department of Parks and Recreation and the Department of Environmental Services. They're joining us virtually tonight, and so I'll turn things over for them for a brief introduction.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eileen Winquist. I'm with Environmental Services, and I do communications for our stormwater management program. Liz, do you also want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Elizabeth Thurber, and I'm the program manager for the Stormwater Infrastructure Program.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Irina Lazi from the Department of Parks and Recreation.
Good evening.
Very good. So I'll give a brief presentation on a body of work that we've been working on for a number of different months. Several changes proposed to our zoning ordinance related primarily to stormwater management, but also involving some upgrades that should be of some assistance to our parks planners for the master planning and development process. Work that's aligned in our adopted plans and policies, the Stormwater Master Plan, as well as the PSMP, as well as our ongoing flood resilient Arlington effort. Many of you are familiar with the Cardinal Elementary School underground vault, a massive public project as a result of extensive community engagement. This type of underground vault is one of the types of projects that's at the heart of this study. And I'll go over very briefly some limitations in the zoning ordinance that prevents that in large from being dispersed in other locations and utilized in other areas. So DES is considering this type of facility not just at school sites, potential for public parks and other public lands, particularly lands that are zoned one of our 3 public districts. Some other examples of stormwater management facilities, we did include diagrams of these as an attachment to your staff report, overland relief measures, flood walls. Sometimes these can be coupled with a pumping station. There is our normal Green Street infrastructure that we use, and occasionally there may be need for a detention pond. Those can be either a wet pond, which has water in it, standing water, or a dry pond that's only fills up during storm events. So you can see a few of those examples. Again, these are our screen captures from your staff report. So some of the limitations in our zoning right now, we don't have a clear path to approval, particularly in those public districts. There are lines in our use table related to utilities that we see in our residential, commercial, mixed use, and industrial districts that, given some of the work that was done in the reformatting about 10 years ago, the ordinance did not get included in the public districts, number one. Number two, we have certain restrictions on what types of structures can go into a setback. And so obviously setbacks are primarily intended for those principal structures, the main building that's on a site. But our current regulations also include things like benches, seating, bike racks, trash receptacles, performance stages as well. And so there is a need for some additional flexibility, particularly with some of our smaller parks. And then also, we answered some of questions on this at ZOCO as well in our staff report related to fencing. So the primary area of attention is along the street, the public right-of-way, where our current standards provide a maximum of 4 feet in height. 4 feet in height does not provide and enable the enclosure for example, for security purposes, for a stormwater management facility, or for a play space such as a basketball court, a tennis court, something along those lines. And so these are some of the areas that we studied with this amendment. And so I mentioned the use table you see in attachment 2 of the staff report. Staff is recommending that line that we add in that all other minor utilities that are stormwater, by and large, our stormwater management projects would be considered minor utilities. We have that listed in our public districts table. Several additional recommendations for the types of structures and items that could go into the setback. I mentioned fence standards as well, which would be raised from 4 feet to, in most instances, 8 feet to allow for that increase of enclosure. Doesn't necessarily mean that DPR or DES would need an 8-foot tall fence in certain instances, but the option is there should the public process for a particular facility and the amenities and the programming in that space warrant it. There's also some additional standards related to the backup pumps and generators, again, in the event that a fully gravity system cannot be utilized for a stormwater management project. I did want to talk a little bit about community engagement first in general for public projects. Again, something that we went into in the staff report as well as in ZOCO, how both DES projects and DPR projects utilize the 6-step guide. And that's going to change depending on the scope and significance of the project. Something as simple as switching out playground equipment, for example. Arena has given me overtures that yes, we would go through an extensive engagement project for something as simple as swapping out playground equipment, notwithstanding some of the larger public master planning projects for parks that this commission has been aware of in recent months and years. So I want the commission and members of the public to know that an action that the board makes and that this commission recommends on these zoning changes does not preclude or obviate or negate the individual a la carte public processes that would come with each individual project thereafter engaging with community stakeholders. The engagement on this zoning study in particular to date has involved our critical watershed groups that have been working very closely with the Flood Resilient Arlington initiative over the past several months. We did make presentations to several of our boards and commissions in the fall. My understanding is that the commission was copied on a letter from the Park and Rec Commission signifying their position on the work. We did hold a virtual public meeting where we provided feedback and coordination and clarifying questions and answers to mostly members of the public back in December. And of course, we were at ZOCO earlier in January of this year. Several important topics, some of which are within the scope of this study, others just bigger policy items that will continue to be of attention for those of us on staff and those of us across the county. The role of public lands with stormwater management, the need to ensure as much as reasonable and feasibly possible that active spaces, that natural areas that there are no net negatives, there are no net losses in public space should public lands be considered for a stormwater management facility. You can see that compilation and that I'm not quite finding the word on a Monday night, but that coordination at the Cardinal Elementary project where the underground detention vault is below a very active play space that's used by the school. The schedule, location, and type of future stormwater management facilities, this is something that DES continues to study, to model, to optimize, not just for effectiveness, but also effectiveness of the system, but effectiveness from a cost perspective. And again, hammering home what I said earlier about public engagement, how public engagement continues to be critical for each and every one of our stormwater management projects and also our park master planning projects. And then finally, particularly from members of the PSMP Implementation Advisory Committee, as well as the Park and Rec Commission, a thirst and a desire and an advocacy for continued work by staff on implementing the 2019 Public Spaces Master Plan. So we're here before you tonight to support your recommendation on this matter to the board. And with that, myself and my colleagues from DES and DPR are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Johnson, are there any public speakers? Thank you. So the matter is with the commission. Did this come before any other commission? Yes, ZOCO, but any other commissions? Okay, and so this came before ZOCO. So Commissioner Sawley, did you want to tee up our discussion?
Yeah, I'll give a quick, I mean, I can't add too much more to Mr. Rogers' presentation. It was very complete and thorough. And again, this has been before this commission before, so it's not exactly new. I think I'll go straight to the heart of the matter. The one major change from what we've seen at the RTA and in January 17th ZOCO meeting is the change to the language on line 47 to 55 or 56 that essentially precludes the clarifications on the fence typology, if that's a adequate term, and it allows essentially an 8-foot barrier, either a fence or a wall, without any further definition. And I thought that being a change, it warrants some conversation. Other than that, I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Other than the fencing, is there any other point of discussion we'd like to add? Commissioner Guerin?
Yeah, thank you. Excellent report, Mr. Rogers. We really appreciate that. I would appreciate some discussion, even if it's just me noting this for the record, how this effort coordinates with our other planning processes, given that one reason we have such a need for stormwater mitigation is some of our other planning processes, including lot coverage and permeable surfaces. So is that something that will be covered in your report to the board, or is that something you want to reflect on a little bit to us now, how this coordinates with some of those other plan components that we reflect on?
We can be responsive to that, Commissioner Guerin. It sounded, if we can dive into that, Madam Chair.
Well, let's get into the fencing, because I think that's an issue that there's several people who have talked. Do you want to start with fencing?
Whatever you prefer, but I think that's...
Is there a targeted question on the issue?
Yeah, so the question is, do we feel comfortable with this change since the RTA to now? And then I would love to hear a little bit more specifics on why we need an open-ended, 8-foot tall wall in particular. I think the fence makes a little bit more sense insofar as basketball courts that are right up against the sidewalk. So I think there's a little bit more tolerance from my perspective and what I've heard from other commissioners that that's more acceptable. I think the opaqueness of a solid wall, you know, are we trying to address, because I think this is different, if I understand this correctly, from a pump house or a utility building or structure, right? We're talking about a wall, particularly facing the street. So I'm unclear as to what it is, the need that we're trying to address or the problem that we're trying to solve with a sort of open dimension, you know, the length to that. If you could address that, thanks.
Yeah. So I'll touch a little bit on how the zoning ordinance regulates fences and walls. I'll get to some of the technical topics, Commissioner Sarli, and then I think I'll ask Ms. Lasik from DPR to talk a little bit more about our best practices with how we use fencing for our parks. She's going to be a better point person than me in that regard. So as you know, the zoning ordinance has that maximum 4-foot high, that maximum height requirement of 4 feet. It can go no higher for a fence or a wall. They're linked and regulated identically. They're sort of lumped in together per our zoning standards. And so again, so for the height of the wall itself, if I can consult a couple notes here. Yeah, I think so. I would tend to agree with your assessment, and I'll let Ms. Lasik expound further that it has not come up in conversation during the course of our study or been something that we've been really planning for or a need to plan for the construction of a wall, particularly one that could potentially obscure views and create that barrier in between a public place and the public right-of-way. The one instance where an increase in the height maximum from 4 feet to something above 4 feet would be incredibly helpful. Something we did touch on at ZOCO is if we have significant changes in grade. I actually have a couple slides where I can show just an image or two of that. And now the image on the left, if the commissioners can see the presentation, I'm sorry, the image on the right is essentially our current zoning ordinance maximum right now. This is the wall that's at the.
We actually can't see the
So
image.
if we can pull the PowerPoint presentation up so that the commission members of the public can see. So on the right-hand side there, you're seeing Longbridge Park. That's basically what the zoning ordinance allows, that maximum. That's the wall around the playground there. Now, and I, unfortunately, Commissioner Sarli, Madam Chair, I don't have a lot of details on how the approval process or the interpretation process for the walls at the edge of Oak Grove Park there that you see on the right. But you can see that some significant changes in grade, particularly at that top image there. This is an image that we did share at ZOCO. And so we do have other parks like this in Arlington where we have these types of significant, sometimes it's like this where the street and sidewalk level is at a lower elevation. And sometimes it's the reverse where the street and sidewalk is at a higher elevation and you're looking down into the programmed area. And so in these instances where we have these types of grade differentials right near the sidewalk, this is where that increased height would be most helpful. We did speak about this internally today, and I asked the question point blank of Arena and others, is this something that we're would we do a wall in other instances otherwise? What sort of purpose would that serve? And we didn't come up with a good answer. So why don't I shut up and I'm going to let Arena speak. It's a little, we don't see her necessarily. So Arena, can you add some more to the conversation?
Thank you, Nick. Yes, thank you very much. I think you summarized it very well. One of the, I think the major instance where we would have a wall is when we have a retaining wall, as Nick mentioned, when there is some topography change, some safety, basically a safety issue, because there are, as you all know, our parks come in a very different states and sizes and topographies. So there are instances where we need to make that, we need to meet that topographic change somehow. So retaining walls are the ones that are often used in our processes. I agree with Nick. I don't think that there is an instance where we would just obscure the view of our parks. We try to keep our parks, as you all know, we try to keep our parks very transparent and open. That is a part of the best practices in park designs. So we would barely ever consider having some obscure fencing or walls to obscure the view into our parks. That's not a very safe strategy, and I don't think that's something that that is our goal ever, unless it's a safety issue. There is something that we're trying to achieve as part of the public process with that fencing. So that is always, that would be the only instance where I can see exploring different types of structures, fencing structures. So, but other than that, I don't think we ever just build a wall to obscure the view of the park. I think that's a common sense, and I don't think anybody is questioning that.
Okay, Commissioner Lentemi?
I just wanted to point out Commissioner Hughes has his hand raised.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lentemi?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused about this, because would a simple retaining wall that's done because, let's say, a street gets widened, it cuts into the park, the topography of the park, which means you have to put a wall there in order to keep the dirt from falling into the street, that would is required under the zoning? Isn't that just simply part of a building code, because you physically need to have the structure there to hold back the land? Mm-hmm. And is that what we're talking about here? Or are we talking about something that it could be 8 feet on one side, but the dirt goes down, so it's only 4 feet on the other, and then we have, so essentially we have a 4-foot wall that you could see over when you're in the park, but it's actually a retaining wall, rather than something that's a full retaining wall going up 8 feet with dirt then at the top. So I'm not sure what we're really talking about here.
So Commissioner Lentemi, in both of those instances, we're talking about all those instances. There could be scenarios where, and this is particularly at the edge of a property, once you get outside of the setback area, the maximum height standards are what the district allows. Once we get within the setback requirement, once we get within a required setback, much more reduced standards kick in with a maximum of 4 feet, whether it's a retaining wall that all reasonableness and common sense would dictate is required, and also has its own standards per the building code as you've cited, or the other types of walls that you've identified.
Don't we have walls like that we have walls like that all over the county, because we have topography all over this county, and we have streets that were widened. Mm-hmm. So do we have these same standards in the R districts or the CO districts, and it's still, so you would have to get some sort of zoning approval because the street was widened and you can't dig out your property to make it go down to the street. You need a retaining wall to keep your property from falling apart. We'd still have to go through a zoning requirements?
So I can't comment. I don't know what process one would go through at that point. All I can say is that the zoning ordinance has this maximum requirement of no more than 4 feet for a fence or a wall within a street setback. So I agree with you, and I've seen, of course, with my own eyes, other instances where Oak Grove Park being another one where the wall height has been higher. I don't have enough background and understanding where perhaps individual zoning administrators during different times, of course, of their time, may have creatively interpreted the regulations to assist in a public project of some sort. But we do feel on the staff side that aligning the zoning standard to those needs, particularly to enable these grade changes so we don't have that confusion, so the regulations are clear, is warranted.
Okay, then I would like it clearer so that we would only, it's a retaining wall, the height necessary for a retaining wall, but on the higher side, no higher than 4 feet. Something like that to make it clear we're not just allowing an 8-foot wall, 8 feet on both sides. That it would have to be in the context of a retaining wall to go beyond the 4 feet. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Hughes?
Thanks, Commissioner Lentemi. You sort of took some of my questions. So, to Mr. Rogers, is the zoning administrator currently interpreting a retaining wall to be a wall within the zoning definition for the 4 foot? Is that what I'm understanding is the crux of the issue here?
Yes, that's correct.
So, I mean, then 8 feet's insufficient, Mr. Rogers, because we have at least Oak Grove Park being an example of a public park facing one with it's well in excess of 8 feet. The most industrial one that would have huge economic consequences would be the retaining walls at the back of the Trade Center site, which hold back a significant portion of Arlington Hill. I just want to make that point known. And to a follow-up from my fellow commissioners, I don't have any solutions, but for deliberations, that we have heard in the past 8 months of proposals seeking a wall or fence exclusively for the privilege of securing, I'll use the word security because staff used it, and blocking the view, and that was at HB Woodlawn by schools. And the PS and S3A districts apply to both schools and the county process. So I'm increasingly uncomfortable with this language, Mr. Rogers, and I probably will abstain from the vote this evening. Thanks, Commissioner Patel.
Thank you. Any additional, Commissioner Sarli?
So I just want to go back to the question. So we had language in there that said retaining walls with a maximum height of 8 feet shall be permitted. And this commission was comfortable with that. So why did staff remove that?
So if I can reframe, if I may, Commissioner
Absolutely.
Sarli. So coming out of ZOCO, the matters related to fences and walls that the commission has been a part of the discussion this evening were clear and present. And so going into the request to advertise, what staff developed were a series of fence standards that addressed and acknowledged that sentiment coming out of the Planning Commission, coming out of ZOCO. While staff continues to feel that maximum flexibility is warranted when it comes to fences and walls, and we continue to feel that, and again, Commissioner Hughes mentioned some examples that could be interior to the site. I would stress that we're talking about along the edges within a required setback. That's where the 4-foot maximum kicks in. So we're focused around the edges of our property here. We wanted to, although staff had a position where the public process and the coordination with the community should allow as flexible of a solution as possible on a case-by-case basis, to acknowledge that feedback from the commission and to acknowledge the sentiment of ZOCO, we developed standards that specified that retaining wall. I'm believing, as I'm remembering the conversation correct, the commissioners in attendance felt strongly that there should be some sort of consideration of a zoning standard that calculated a maximum height of the wall. And as I recall it, the understanding from ZOCO was that these situations where we have grade changes with topography should, of course, be enabled, and best practices should be allowed, and the zoning should not be an obstacle. So the zoning language that was included in the RTA you've cited tonight, you saw as just a formatting exercise to reiterate the staff recommendation. Our recommendation was that those A, B, and C fence standards not be adopted into the zoning ordinance. But again, for the advertising purposes, to allow the discussion you're having tonight, that is something that the board could adopt and still keep its public hearing schedule.
Commissioner Scholl has his hand raised.
Commissioner Scholl? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rogers, you mentioned that the standards, you didn't want them to be adopted as part of this RTA. Was there a reason, though, that they weren't provided to the commission? Or are you referring to the standards that are at the back of the staff report, page 39, or different ones?
So the language that Commissioner Sarli has identified was included in the request to advertise report to the board, and it is included in your staff report this evening. Yes, there is some strike-throughs to signify staff's recommendation, but I would contend that the language has been provided to you in full with a fulsome description of what staff's position are and the commission's sentiment coming out of ZOCO.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. Can we move on at this point to Commissioner Guerin's question? Commissioner Guerin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Yeah, my question remains, when we look at something like this that is forward-thinking, and I was reminded by Commissioner Peterson, we've even included some really noteworthy, innovative things that the county is doing that we don't see elsewhere, even in the region, the largest underground cistern. Is that correct? Yeah, I'll call that out on our behalf. How is this relating with our other policies? Because I did raise this at ZOCO, and I feel like it's still true. I feel like we're always going to be playing catch-up with stormwater management with our other policies that are in place.
So this is one piece of a broader tapestry, and I'll have Eileen talk a little bit more about how this piece fits in with the other programs and initiatives that are past milestones and are continuously underway.
Sure. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so this zoning amendment is really a one piece of Arlington's comprehensive stormwater management program, which includes both flood resilience and also water quality and stormwater management, stormwater treatment initiatives. And so the primary focus of this amendment is, again, more on flood mitigation and reducing flood risk. We have other elements of our program, stormwater management program, that focus on treating and reducing impacts from runoff, such as our Green Streets program, our stream and pond improvement projects, and also our requirements for stormwater management for developments, such as for larger developments and for single-family homes, which was we do require since 2014. The county opted to require stormwater facilities for new home projects, and then also increase those requirements in 2021. So now, of course, the county's stormwater management ordinance and the governing state legislature, mandates how to mitigate impacts from new impervious cover, but that does not include limitations on total impervious cover. So that again would be, a different aspect of the zoning ordinance, beyond the scope of this study, would be if the county and the community wanted to revisit, lot coverage maximums around the county. So again, but this study is really focused on the public districts and the zoning requirements there. So I don't know if that helps to.
That absolutely helps, Ms. Winquist. Thank you. I want to make sure that we have a full discussion about all of this and not just see this as a sort of a siloed effort. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this topic? Wonderful. I'm going to go to Commissioner Sarli for a motion.
Sure thing. So I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion to, I can't say reinstate.
So just move what you want to move.
Okay. So we'll do
there's
the
no
motion
pending
first,
motion.
and then we'll make the amendment.
Well, no, just move your motion. What would you like to
Okay.
move?
I would move that we unstrike text.
You move that the planning commission recommend to the
I
county
move
board-
that the planning commission recommend that we
to the county board.
unstrike, is that a word? The text from lines 46 to 55.
So can you just move the motion as you want it, as you want the text to be? Because it's not a pending motion at this point.
Okay, and I'll read the text.
Yes, so
Are you guys keeping up with me? Do I need to back up? I didn't write this before, sorry. It's on page 2 of the zoning report, but it's page 24, I believe.
Just give me a moment.
I guess I can speak while we're waiting. My sentiment is that the retaining wall in particular is addressed, and I would be willing to cogitate a higher level of acceptability to the retaining wall. I think we have 14 wall for the stormwater. We have retaining walls with the handrail and guardrail above it as not being included in the height of the retaining wall. So I think there's a lot of flexibility being afforded to this situation already. And so I'm a little bit unclear. I remain unclear as to why we need to allow potentially a freestanding 8-foot high wall, right? We understand that a retaining wall is perfectly acceptable. I don't understand why the language would simply allow a freestanding wall.
Commissioner Scholl has his hand raised.
So I think we're making a motion right now.
I'm just waiting for the
Yeah.
text to come up. so I
We're
was
still
just-
trying to pull the text up.
So Commissioner Shaw, I'll call on you as soon as we get the motion on the table.
I was just filling in to avoid the dead air.
Oh, that's fine. And then we don't have you to ask for any additional discussion, because we've heard it.
Here's the text.
Okay, wonderful.
So Commissioner Sarley, this is the motion at the end, the reference to attachment 2 of the staff report. And if you'd like me to scroll down to the text that you're moving to clarify, be inserted into that motion to the recommendation, I'm happy to scroll down to that as well.
Yes, please, do scroll down to that. All right, I will start again. I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county board adopt the language as follows. So now I'll read the language. Starting on line 46, on any lot used for publicly operated parks and open spaces, fences and walls up to 8 feet in height are permitted in any, there's a little bit of.
So, okay,
May
I'm
exceed-
sorry, Commissioner Shaw, I don't want to interrupt you. We need to start with the amendment to enable, we need to start with the amendment to the ordinance. So if you read the first part of the recommendation, and then
Okay.
you can insert what language you wanted to be put back into it as part of your ongoing.
All right, I misunderstood. So I will now go to the original motion. So I move that the commission recommend that the county board adopt the attached ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify Articles 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, and 18 of the Arlington County zoning ordinance to facilitate the following. A, permitting stormwater management facilities and other types of minor utilities in the S-3A, S-D, and P-S zoning districts. B, allowing stormwater management facilities to be located within required setbacks. C, increasing the maximum height of fencing for stormwater management facilities and for publicly operated parks and open spaces to 8 feet. D, establishing a maximum height of 14 feet for flood walls. E, allowing certain types of accessory structures to be located within required setbacks from any street in parks and similar public spaces. F, permitting fencing associated with stormwater management facilities and parks and similar public spaces greater than 4 feet in height to encroach into the required street setback. G, excluding handrails and guardrails from the calculations for maximum height for a wall. H, establishing the use standards for the location and enclosure of pumps and backup generators for stormwater management facilities. I, listing stormwater pumping station and flood walls as examples of minor utilities in the utilities use category. 12.2.4.K, enabling county board modification through use permit approval for the aforementioned use standards and for the maximum height of a flood wall. And K, incorporating references to use standards for utility referenced in 12.4.9 in the Arlington County zoning ordinances use tables. L, establishing the definition for flood walls. M, making additional editorial changes for improved clarity. And N, for other reasons required for public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practice. Now do I say my part?
No, we need a second now that we're moving the county board's recommended motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by by Commissioner Guerin. I think that Commissioner Peterson may actually have a motion to amend.
Yeah, so I just wanted to see if it would be easier to instead move that the Planning Commission as an amending motion, move that the Planning Commission recommend that the county manager adopt the county manager's recommendation, but not point C, which is increasing the maximum height of fencing for stormwater management facilities and for publicly operated parks and open spaces to 8 feet. Would that be the equivalent motion?
No.
Okay.
We want to allow 8-foot fences at the border for basketball courts, for instance. We just don't want a wall, a retaining wall, or a freestanding wall in this case.
Okay. So are you withdrawing your motion?
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. That's fine.
And I can second? Commissioner Sarver?
Judge, Commissioner Guerin seconded the motion. Commissioner Scholl, did you want to say something?
Not any longer, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Good.
I think Commissioner Sarli, okay, so Commissioner Sherrill, you're not here, and you need to help us right now. Commissioner Sarli wants to amend his motion
Correct.
to include the stricken language. Should we, can he go ahead and amend a motion that he's made?
Yeah, what,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Sarli, what line, I think you said this and I just lost it.
Page 46.
Page 46?
It's line 46.
Page 29 or 24. Yeah.
Line 24.
No, page 24, line 46, starting on item 2 of the 3.2.6.
It's 1-2I, right?
Yeah.
Not too
So
loud.
it would be, I think Commissioner Sarli, I think what you're looking for is now that the staff motion is on the table, I think you're looking for an amendment that says that the commission additionally recommends that the text stricken on lines 48 through 55 be included in the adopted ordinance. Is that correct?
Then should I read it? That is correct.
So I would suggest that you move that as an amending motion to the commission, to the motion on the table.
I move that the Planning Commission advise the county board to adopt the language that's been struck from line 46 to 55 back into the motion. Does that?
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Is there any further discussion on this? Okay, let's vote on the amended motion. Commissioner Bagley?
Aye.
Gearin?
Aye.
Steinberger?
Aye.
Weir?
Aye.
Peterson?
Aye.
Sarli?
Aye.
Lantelmi?
Aye.
Hughes?
Abstain.
Schroll?
Aye.
Patel? Aye. The motion carries. The motion to amend carries 9-0. And now we have the amended motion. I don't think we count the abstentions, though. Yeah. We're ready to vote on that. Is there any further discussion? All right. Commissioner Bagley?
Aye.
Gearin? Aye. Steinberger?
Aye.
Weir?
Aye.
Peterson?
Aye.
Sarli?
Aye.
Lantelmi?
Aye.
Hughes?
Abstain.
I'm sorry, was that an abstain?
Abstain.
Thank you. Schroll?
Aye.
And Patel, aye. The motion, the amended motion carries 9-0. Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers and team. And thank you, everyone, for being patient with us as we move through that motion. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Martin, do we have another, oh, it's up to PC business now, yes?
Yes, PC
Wonderful.
business.
All right, so we are, we've received the committee reports from our colleagues. I hope everyone's had a chance to review them. I am going to move for unanimous consent for the approval of the February 6th meeting minutes. Any objection? Seeing none, those minutes are approved. Commissioner Peterson, do you have some amended rosters and a new roster maybe?
Yes, for the SPRC chair update, I sent you all an email. We also have some rosters to update. So colleagues, you recently received the proposed SPRC subgroup roster for Wakefield Manor. Madam Chair, I ask for your unanimous consent in approving that roster.
Okay, any objection? Seeing none, that roster is approved.
Okay, and now we have a couple to amend. Colleagues, you recently received the proposed SPRC subgroup roster amendments for Wells Fargo and Crystal Towers 3. Madam Chair, I ask for your unanimous consent to amend the previously adopted rosters.
Any objection? Seeing none, that roster is approved. Thank you very much, Madam. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Martin, do we have another matter for tonight?
Yes.
Yes, we do. The moment everyone's been waiting for. The fourth item is the adoption of amendments to the general land use plan and Arlington County zoning ordinance to support expanded housing options resulting from the missing middle housing study. And this is GP-357-21-1, ZOA-2023-02, ordinances to amend, reenact, and recodify the Arlington County zoning ordinance. And we have quite a few public speakers.
Thank you. Do we have staff report?
Matt.
I don't believe Mr. Ladd is with us right now, but we will check back in a minute.
We have a staff presentation in a moment.
Okay, so we'll just take a 5-minute recess to allow Mr. Ladd to join us. Thank you. Couldn't have started without you.
Thank you for getting through your business so quickly.
So we are ready whenever you are.
All right, I'm ready.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. My name is Matt Ladd with the County's Planning Division. I'll be presenting the General Land Use Plan and Zoning Ordinance amendments that are the final products of the Missing Middle Housing Study. In the interest of time, I will forgo much of the background material presented in December with the RTA. I do have just a couple of overview slides as a reminder of the study's goals and schedule over the past 3 years. The Missing Middle Housing Study started in 2020 with the goals of increasing the county's housing supply and allowing a wider range of housing options. The study was a direct recommendation from the county's Affordable Housing Master Plan to, quote, explore flexibility in housing types and residential uses in single-family neighborhoods. We are now nearing the end of the third and final study phase, which has included county board engagement and an iterative process of drafting and refining draft amendments to the general land use plan and zoning ordinance. These amendments have been informed by the community input received throughout the process. The proposed GLUP amendment for expanded housing options would add a new subsection to the special planning areas section of the booklet. This new section describes the overall policy goals and objectives for enabling new housing options in areas currently limited to single detached housing. The proposed amendment also acknowledges that land use policies that restrict housing options, which were adopted many decades ago, have resulted in inequities in housing opportunities. Following the Planning Commission's recommendation from December, we are proposing an update to the GLUP booklet's planning history section. The draft amendment sets forth 3 goals for these lower density residential areas: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and neighborhood vibrancy. Next, I'll move on to the proposed zoning ordinance amendment. In January, the County Board authorized advertisement of multiple options among the zoning ordinance request to advertise. The staff report includes an evaluation of these options based on the considerations shown on the slide, including the extent that each option could advance racial equity goals. The staff report includes recommendations for many elements. However, for 4 areas, the county manager has no recommendation among the advertised options. These elements are the maximum number of units allowed, minimum site area, lot coverage, and the annual cap on development. For these elements without a recommendation, the staff report includes detailed analysis and discussion based on the considerations shown on the slide. The county board may choose to consider factors beyond those provided in staff's evaluation in making its determination. As presented in December, the proposed zoning text would establish a new optional by right development path called Expanded Housing Option Development, or EHO. Sites larger than 1 acre would be required to secure a special exception use permit rather than being allowed by right. The EHO zoning tool would provide new options for property owners and would not change the underlying zoning or the ability to build or expand one-family dwellings. The advertised uses include 2-family dwellings, townhouses with 3 units, and multifamily buildings with up to 6 units. While this is an area without a recommendation, the equity analysis provided as an attachment to the staff report highlights that 6plexes would provide the greatest opportunity for housing attainability compared to options with fewer units. The county board advertised 5 options for minimum site area standards. These options present different approaches for site area or transit proximity requirements for buildings with 5 or 6 units. In the interest of time, I will not walk through each option right now, though we will be prepared to discuss the details with the Commission. These maps compare the various site area options 2B through 2E. The teal color indicates areas where housing types with up to 6 units could be allowed in each option, and the yellow areas would be limited to 4 units or fewer. These options represent a range of alternatives that reflect multiple community priorities, such as transit proximity, focusing on 5 and 6plexes on larger lots, and encouraging a range of housing opportunities across the county. The county board advertised 2 options for setting a maximum gross floor area for EHO development. Staff is proposing a hybrid of these two options that would set a maximum for all housing types with a slightly higher average unit size for semi-detached and townhouse dwellings. The intent of these standards is to encourage modest-sized housing options, to encourage the production of more units, and to be sensitive to the neighborhood context. Next is a provision that would affect only about 0.5% of R5 to R20 zone properties that coincide with one of 3 GLUP planning districts. Staff proposes that these properties should not be eligible for EHO to reinforce existing long-range land use plans as the preferred vision for change. However, we recognize that not all of these sites have the same likelihood of redevelopment. Therefore, staff is proposing to adjust the planning district boundaries for sites where the planned vision has already been achieved. These boundary adjustments would begin with Cherrydale, which we are proposing to bring forward by the end of this year. Lot coverage is another element where there's no recommendation. The two advertised options would both maintain the same maximum lot coverage that can be achieved for a one-family dwelling. The difference is whether a rear detached garage would be required to reach this maximum. Option 4B could provide more opportunities for tree planting and retention and could result in slightly greater housing square footage compared to 4A. However, option 4A is more consistent with the premise of duplicating current one-family development standards. For minimum parking requirements, the recommendation is options 5A and 5E. Transit proximate sites would have a minimum requirement of 0.5 spaces per unit. Other sites would be required to provide 1 space per unit. This could be reduced if a parking survey indicates that adequate on-street parking is available. And in the relatively rare circumstance that a new or expanded curb cut would result in the loss of an equivalent number of on-street parking spaces, no minimum spaces would be required. Moving to site layout and design, the advertised zoning text includes a number of standards that are intended to address community concerns about compatibility with existing development patterns. These standards include limits on where parking spaces can be located on a site, limits on the width of a street-facing garage wall, and requirements for the orientation and location of building entrances and screening. Another site layout standard is tree requirements. When we last presented to the Planning Commission on the RTA, the proposal was 1 shade tree per dwelling unit. The County Board advertised a greater requirement, 4 shade trees for a development with 2 to 4 units and 8 trees for a site with 5 to 6 units. Staff is recommending this requirement, which in many cases would exceed the number of trees required by the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, even for single detached development. The final zoning element I will discuss is options to set an annual limit or cap on EHO permits. The advertised cap is up to 58 permits per year, which could be adopted with or without a sunset provision, meaning that it would no longer apply after a certain date without a subsequent zoning ordinance amendment. The County Board could also set a method of distribution for a cap based on zoning districts. The advertised zoning text also includes an option to not set a permit cap. This is another area with no county manager recommendation. As part of the study scope for Phase 3, staff is recommending specific areas for follow-on work and future study. If the proposed amendments are adopted, we intend to track and report on EHO development. This includes publishing and mapping real-time permitting data and an annual report on a number of data points which are outlined in the staff report. As recommended by the Planning Commission in December, staff proposes to develop educational materials so that homeowners can understand the options available to them, with engagement targeted to areas identified as communities of color in the equity analysis. Staff will continue to move forward with ongoing studies of homeownership opportunities and reinvestment in the RA zoning districts. We have previously discussed a future study of lot coverage and placement standards that is recommended in the draft forestry and natural resources plan. And early in the presentation, I mentioned staff's intent to review the GLUP planning district boundaries, starting with the Cherrydale Special Revitalization District. To conclude my presentation, the county manager is recommending adoption of the GLUP and zoning ordinance amendments, incorporating items for which the county manager has provided a recommendation, and addressing items for which there is no recommendation and should be determined by the county board. One last item I would note is that if adopted in March, the zoning amendment would be effective July 1st, allowing time for staff to prepare to receive applications through the permitting system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ladd. Ms. Martin, Ms. Johnson, do we have any public speakers?
We have around 70 public speakers.
Okay, thank you. So before public comment, I want to make a quick note. We'll be hearing, as I said this earlier in this hearing, that we'll be hearing from all in-person speakers who are appearing in person right now. If you've registered to speak in person, but now you are joining us virtually, those speakers will be heard on Wednesday. Okay, so all in-person speakers, with the addition of the one already scheduled virtual speaker, will be heard tonight. Additionally, just a point, you are invited to allow whomever it is that you choose to stand behind you, should you choose to do so. So you are the person that gets to decide who stands behind you if you would like to have somebody stand behind you. If you elect not to invite somebody, that too is your choice, okay? So you control your personal space. Madam Clerk, may we call the first speaker?
The first speaker is Terry Armao.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Your time starts now.
Hi, thank you for having me this evening. I am speaking for about 170 people in my neighborhood, Penrose, who are opposed to the missing middle study as proposed now. And I guess I want to ask, are you guys willing to roll the dice by allowing development without planning first? You don't build a house and then later go back and draw up the plans. It doesn't work like that. As far as trees, when trees are removed, it can literally take 20 to 50 years to get the benefits from new trees that have been lost from removing the old trees. However, we are in a climate emergency now, and we can't wait 50 years to try to get those benefits back. Also, when you remove trees, it creates more pollution. And in the South Arlington neighborhoods where I live, we already have diminished tree canopy. Children and seniors are at a greater risk of illness from this type of pollution. So to me, this is not equity. This is discrimination on lower income neighborhoods along South Arlington. The county cannot say with any certainty that missing middle will retain any diversity or attract any new diversity. There is also no tracking mechanism to gauge if there is any net gain or loss.
You have 10
and
seconds
that's a
remaining.
big piece of what is missing. Please do not advise the county board to move forward with the current options. Remove 4, 5, and 6 plexes and 3 plexes only
Thank you for your
on large
comments.
parcels along the transit.
The next speaker is Eleanor Schwartz, followed by Kathy Rehill and Alice Tewell and Rebecca Lawrence.
I oppose this initiative. Further guardrails are needed. Given that Arlington is nearly built out, it will cause teardowns of affordable housing not replaced by units affordable to teachers or first responders. It may not do much for homeownership either. Instead, densify housing at transit-served arterials as in Barcroft, rather than randomly by right and behind the curve on needed infrastructure. Plan by corridor, like Lanston Boulevard. Please consider 5 constructive measures. 1, be accountable. Require board-approved use permits for existing building envelopes, setback, and stormwater standards, and make a well-monitored pilot project with a significantly lowered annual cap for the duration. 2, meet the goal of no net loss of affordable housing. 3, be transparent. Track changes in EHO building types, units, and bedrooms per neighborhood. Also, track the net change in affordable housing. 4, plan ahead for capacity and balance. Pause or sunset upzoning based on real-time evaluation of impacts for each neighborhood. ensure capacity of infrastructure for water, sewer, and schools, apply at a minimum the county tree replacement standards, avoid imbalance in EHO units between North and South Arlington and among neighborhoods. Lastly, exclude inappropriate areas, eliminate resource protection areas and areas with steep slopes from lot size totals, and lastly, remove sites where additional hardscape
10 seconds remaining.
will result in flooding and narrow streets with insufficient parking, where it would preclude access by emergency and refuse trucks. Thank you.
Next, we have Alice Towell, followed by Emily Lindenmeyer.
Should I bring this down? Okay. Hi, my name is Reverend Alice Toole. I'm the pastor at Clarendon Presbyterian Church in Lyons Village, a homeowner in South Arlington in Barcroft, a parent of young children, and part of the Voice Board. So I'd like to think I have voice behind me. I'm speaking in favor of missing middle, particularly to allow sixplexes without restrictions. I'm also a very light-skinned person of color who is half Asian. When I see the anti-missing middle signs and speeches across Arlington, it feels like an attempt to uphold the practices of exclusionary zoning resulting from redlining. These efforts to protect single-family zoning make me feel unwelcome in Arlington, particularly the areas where I work and where I live. Protecting redlining says to me that those who are not entirely white are not meant to live here. In this time of missing middle debate in our county, I believe we have caused great mental, spiritual, and bodily harm to our neighbors who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as our LGBTQIA+ siblings. As a citizen of this country and a religious leader, I must speak out that it is immoral, unjust, and against who we say we are as Arlington to zone over 75% of our land for only single-family detached homes. I would love for more people, especially those who do not benefit from generational wealth, to be able to buy into neighborhoods with safe streets, like where I live and work, to teach kids how to bike, with front yards for impromptu conversations and backyards for green space to provide for mental health. County Planning Commission, I urge you to make the historic vote and recommendation to allow sixplexes without restrictions across Arlington.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Emily Lindenmeyer, followed by Michael Gearing and Adam Theo. After Adam Theo is Raekwon Russell and Ethan Epstein.
Hello, my name is Emily Linnemeyer, and I'm here with my son. He's back in the back over there. We live with my spouse and my daughter in missing middle housing in Arlington in a townhome community. We moved here in 2018 from the Los Angeles area, from a neighborhood we loved that incorporated multiple types of missing middle housing, along with single-family homes. Coming from that situation, I was surprised to learn that missing middle housing is currently not allowed in most of Arlington County. We first looked at a single-family home, but the townhome we bought was more affordable for us. When we first moved in, we realized we were neighbors with some of my children's schoolmates. They became friends and would often play together running around the neighborhood. We love our townhome community that is diverse by age, race, renter-owner status, and family status. We get to know one another through events like gardening in our common areas. Our townhome is one unit in a block of 8. It seems strange to me that even with this proposal to allow missing middle housing in all of Arlington, my type of townhome community will not be allowed in new areas because it has more than 3 connected units. There are all kinds of housing options in the area in which we live near Columbia Pike and George Mason Drive, and I love the diversity it brings to our community and my children's schools. As a white person, I have learned to look at the groups supporting various options and realize that the more diverse the people, the more perspectives and better ideas they offer. I stand with the groups supporting the most expansive options for missing middle housing. It will offer a tool for addressing systemic racism and will help us build more diverse, inclusive communities And I also urge you to support the most expansive option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Michael Gehring, followed by Adam Theo and Raekwon Russell.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Mike Gehring, and I'm a 26-year resident of here in Arlington. And I've spoken before in favor of missing middle housing, and I believe there are many very good reasons to support missing middle housing, not the least of which is quality of life. I have to say that all these years I've lived here, it's been a godsend because it is close to where I work, it's close to shopping for groceries, public facilities like libraries and rec centers, and the public transportation system is excellent. And I have to say, if I lived far out into the suburbs or exurbs of, Woodbridge or Herndon or Manassas, my quality of life would greatly diminish. And there are so many other people who feel the exact same way, and they can't afford the luxury of a $2 million house or a $2 million condo. So that being said, I urge members of this commission to please keep us in mind when you go before the board to make your recommendations, and please support missing middle housing. And thank you very much for your time.
Next, we have Adam Theo, followed by Raekwon Russell and Ethan Epstein.
Hello, I'm Adam Theo, co-founder and director of communications for the YIMBYs of Northern Virginia. Your detailed and thoughtful recommendations to the county board will help shape our future for decades to come. A key option before you involves parking, which is both expensive to build and land intensive. Requiring parking spaces necessarily raises building costs and occupies space that could otherwise be used for tree canopy. We believe that the option 5C, which has no parking mandate for lots near transit, best achieves the goals of Arlington's master transportation plan. It should be noted that the Transportation Commission also recommends 5C. Additionally, we have serious concerns with the proposed 2E option, which further limits where sixplexes can be constructed. Particularly troublesome is that 2E's specified distances for transit-proximate sites diverges greatly from the distances used in the master transportation plan. Cutting the distances to metro stations and premium bus service and cutting out the priority bus network entirely, which covers Langston Boulevard, is highly unusual and sets a very bad precedent for consistency and easy understanding of our county code. Again, it should be noted that the Transportation Commission recently discussed this inconsistency and did not recommend adopting 2E, largely for this reason also. It is also the position of the YIMBYs of Northern Virginia that the 2E option in eliminating areas within the priority bus network of Langston Boulevard for development of sixplexes is deliberately designed to keep North Arlington from carrying its fair share of needed housing, continuing Arlington's racial and economic divide. As the staff report says, 5 and 6plexes are a key component to supporting the county's goals for racial equity. Option 2A is the best option for providing homeowners flexibility and should be adopted. Finally, please permit missing middle development to apply within special planning districts. Adopt 10B to guarantee all R-zoned areas can make use.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Next, we have Raekwon Russell, followed by Ethan Epstein, John Musso, and Ashley Goff.
Hi, my name is Raekwon, and I'm an employee for the Arlington Public School System. I've been in Arlington for 4 years, and in order to live in this area, I've had to have 2 to 3 roommates at a time. Because competition for units are so high, rent goes up year after year. And as a public servant, I don't understand why there is a debate within my community whether or not I and others like me should have access to more affordable housing. I'm here to ask that we stop the myth that missing middle will replace the so-called affordable existing single-family homes. It will not. Please stop pretending. Even the oldest bungalows in Arlington are not an affordable option. I support missing middle, and so should you. Thank you.
Next, we have John Musso, or Ethan Epstein, followed by John Musso.
Hey everyone, thanks for all the hard work you do, and I'm sorry you're in for a late night, so I'll get into it. Missing Middle is more diverse. It will be when it's built, and it already is where it currently exists. Multifamily neighborhoods in Arlington are more diverse than single family per staff report. Missing Middle is more environmentally friendly with a smaller carbon footprint per unit and reduction in sprawl and transportation emissions. Missing Middle is more affordable. The average townhouse here costs 30% less than the average single family home. That's across all ages, new and old. It makes no sense to argue that because every single EHO won't be affordable for buyers below the AMI, we should instead keep zoning that only allows even more expensive houses that are affordable to even fewer people. Please recommend 2A to allow more affordable options in the most places, since that's what everyone ostensibly is asking for. I mean, look, this person even made a poster to protest the removal of the most affordable 8-plexes, which was the most affordable option. So thank you for your support. You're right, we do want more affordability. I won't waste time getting into on-street parking occupancy, the 85% target, and the parking and curb space element of the MTP, the cost of parking, or the externalities of underutilized pavement, because as planning commissioners, you guys already know all that. All I'll say is I hope that you guys find it as funny as I do when people are gonna come up here blustering about how every unit's gonna have 2 cars, as if you all, as planning commissioners, wouldn't know that Arlington's average household vehicle ownership is well below that. Finally, please keep in mind what EHO does and does not do. It does not expand the building envelope, so visual character, drainage, and all those things are not affected. That said, please keep in mind that every requirement in the EHO overlay, like parking, lessens the affordability of an EHO and its viability in place of a McMansion when a new building is built. I have no doubts that this commission will continue its excellent planning on this. And I commend you all for your focus through all of the misinformation and noise. Again, sorry that y'all are in for a late night. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have John Musso, followed by Ashley Goff, Jillian Burgess, and Rosalind Risher. And I apologize if I'm saying any names wrong in advance.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I'm John Musso, a proud resident of Arlington, and specifically the Courthouse neighborhood, and the Government Affairs Manager at the Arlington Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to speak tonight briefly on behalf of the Chamber to express our support for the Missing Middle Housing Ordinance. We support the goals of this ordinance in allowing for greater density and a greater diversity of housing types across Arlington for its residents and its workforce. We do appreciate the extent to which the county, staff, Planning Commission, and the board have engaged with the public on this matter, both here at hearings like this and at previous community listening sessions and meetings. We believe that the natural next step after all of this community conversation is to proceed ahead with the ordinance. So we ask for the commission to vote to recommend this ordinance for adoption by the board on the 18th. Additionally, we do hope that the commission goes forward and recommends the ordinance with option 7B, the option that forgoes a cap on missing middle or expanded housing option permits. We are concerned that a cap on permits in the way that it is formed would minimize the positive effects that this ordinance would have on the housing situation and housing market. Additionally, we do hope that the county remains mindful that this is only one step and one component of a greater strategy for ensuring that there is a sufficient amount of attainable housing in the county of Arlington, and which is a crucial part in making sure that Arlington remains a vibrant place for its residents and its workers. Therefore, we hope you go ahead and recommend the ordinance. Thank you.
Next, we have Ashley Goff, followed by Jillian Burgess, followed by Rosalind Risher, and Claudia Del Galdillo.
My name is Reverend Ashley Goff. I'm the pastor at Arlington Presbyterian Church. I live in Green Valley with my family, and I'm here with Voice. Systemic racism appears in many guises. The racist use of land use law and policy has been one of the foundational causes of inequality in our nation. The legal basis for land use regulation in our nation, including zoning, is the general legal power of a given jurisdiction to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of its residents. And yet that power has often been used contrary to those purposes in a way that is systematically racist. Zoning laws resulted in African Americans and other people of color being concentrated within parts of a community. Arlington has not escaped these effects, and its land use law and policy remain areas that require revision and amendment. And the Planning Commission is regularly focused on impacts of our land use law and policy on how to address and correct the structural injustices resulting from both. This includes careful consideration of the equity implications of any development or land use policy proposal. More needs to be done. The Planning Commission is committed to making Arlington's land use laws and policies equitable for all Arlingtonians and to support efforts to bring diverse voices to our process. These are excerpts from the equity statement of the Arlington County Planning Commission, July 6, 2020. And planning commissions have historically been used to uphold exclusionary zoning. Voice asked the Planning Commission to subvert its own original intent by supporting missing middle. And to uphold this equity statement and to do the work that needs to be done, Voice calls upon the Planning Commission to vote in favor of the most expansive version possible.
Next, we have Jillian Burgess, followed by Rosalind Risher and Scott Barton, and then Grace White.
Hi, my name is Jillian Burgess, and I'm here to enthusiastically support middle missing housing in Arlington. I support the most expansive options to create the most housing opportunity, specifically 2A, 4B, 5A with the 2C definitions, 5E, 7B, 8A, and option B for numbers 9, 10, 11, and 12. But I want to focus on option 10B, whether properties in planning districts will be eligible for expanded housing options. If you exclude such properties, you will create a disadvantage for keeping R-zoned parcels included in planning districts that we don't have today. This change will make it more difficult to create sensible planning districts, and it would make it harder to build more housing on transportation corridors. My house is in the Cherrydale Revitalization District, which was adopted in 1994 when I was in high school. Like our neighbors, we never cared whether we were in the CRD boundaries because there was no downside to being in or out. And because we're behind a new development on Langston Boulevard, we're not a candidate for redevelopment. In fact, the vast majority of the R-zone parcels in the CRD are either behind new development or they're up huge hills from Langston Boulevard. So option 10A would arbitrarily restrict the ability to build more housing on our properties. If you want to scope in more scope parcels along the pike out of EHO, you have better options than doing a blanket ban. You can specify that only planning districts passed before the year 2000 are scoped out of EHO. Alternatively, you can recommend that Arlington establish a process for R-zone parcels to get out of a planning district.
10 seconds remaining.
Become eligible for EHO if they could not be part of redevelopment. And Arlington should revisit the boundaries of the Cherrydale Revitalization District. I'm excited to welcome new neighbors, and thank you for your service.
Next, we have Rosalind Risher, followed by Scott Barton, Grace White, Martha Harris, and Keenan Ashbrook.
Hi, my name is Rosalind Risher. I'm a third-generation Arlingtonian. I'm a homeowner and Columbia Pike resident, and I live in missing middle housing. I'm also the granddaughter of Ellen Bosman, the leader for whom this building was named. Ellen's legacy is expanding economic opportunity in Arlington and making Arlington a better place for everyone to live and work. She worked for her entire career, including through retirement, to increase affordable housing options in Arlington. She instilled the importance of that in me, and she would have been enthusiastically in favor of the expanded housing option, which is why I'm here today speaking in favor of building more accessibly priced housing opportunities for young people, teachers, civil servants, and for historically marginalized populations, typically without access to generational wealth. I would like to urge you to adopt option 2A because it is the most effective at distributing the market for missing middle housing equitably throughout the county. Options that heavily restrict the locations where 5 and 6 plexes can be built, most especially option 2B and option 2E, will concentrate these types of expanded housing options in fewer neighborhoods. The most effective missing middle housing strategy is the one that is most flexible and allows housing supply to fit the demand. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Scott Barton, followed by Grace White and Martha Harris.
Hello, my name is Scott Barton. I've lived in Arlington for 18 years, and I work at a nonprofit with an office in Clarendon. My organization hires a lot of young people in the area. A lot of people move here to Arlington for the great quality of life, and they end up falling in love with the community. But unfortunately, a lot of times, if they want to grow their family, get married, have kids, they end up having to leave the community. And I think what's really missing is that next step for people between having an apartment and owning a single-family home. And so I'm in favor of a lot of aspects of the Missing Middle program that would open up a lot of these options for people. I think in order to really have Arlington keep up with the rest of the metro area and be able to provide for the needs of a lot of our residents, we need some of the more expansive options that are available, specifically sixplexes. A couple other things I want to draw the attention to are the option 2A, the minimum site area requirement, and 4B, the lot coverage flexibility. I think these are the kinds of things that will allow more housing to get built on the land that we have in Arlington, and that will provide more options for people so that they can stay in the community once they've fallen in love with it. Thank you.
Next is Grace White, followed by Martha Harris, Keenan Ashbrook, and Marley Franzen.
Hi, cool. Hear me? Awesome. Hi, my name is Grace, and I'm here to take an angle I haven't heard many people take, and that is the tax of car dependency. Having to own a car is a tax on working people. If you can't get around with any other means, it's going to cost you between $400 or $500 a month on average. I know this because I came out as trans last year. I began my social and medical transition, and I was left with a choice: continue to own a car or live my truth. This was an easy decision for me to make, but I had that decision because I live in Westover, which is one of the few places in Arlington which allows missing middle housing. This means that the density supported local businesses that I could walk to. The density makes these businesses viable and strong. It also means the density supported fairly regular public transit, which means if I need to get out of the neighborhood, I also don't need to use a car. This decision would not have been available to me if I lived in a mandated single-family neighborhood with sprawl. You look at the best transit and the most vibrant businesses in Arlington, they're always next to density. So I encourage you to recommend the most expansive version of missing middle, and then also come back to the table in the future so that we can use this density to end that car dependency tax across Arlington. Thank you.
Next, we have Martha Harris, followed by Keenan Ashbrook.
Thank you for having us here today. The whitehouse.gov website has put out in the last year several entries that have expressed the federal government's desire to increase density throughout the United States and offering a big monetary bonus to communities that do their best in removing impediments to density of housing, including zoning laws. Removing zoning laws would, of course, increase density in housing. And I'm wondering if the county board has ever come forth with the notion that this is an incentive, this monetary incentive from the federal government to increase density by removing zoning from Arlington County. It would mean a substantial windfall for the county, and I wonder if they have just simply failed to mention that to us as an incentive for why they're trying to get rid of zoning for all single families. That would be important for the public to know, and I think we deserve to know. Another thing that I'd like to bring up is the lack of actual studies, other than staff studies by the county, on whether removal of single-family housing zoning would increase affordability and would lessen would increase racial diversity. There have not been really any adequate studies other than through the staff and other experts in other cities where this has been tried have come up with the opposite results. The final thing I want to say is that there's a big demographic divide.
10 seconds
it seems,
remaining.
between the people who are against it and the people who are for missing middle housing. Some of us were well into middle age before we could afford it, okay?
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Next, we have Keenan Ashbrook, followed by Marley Franzen and Mary Ann Shea.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Keenan Ashbrook, and I live in Ballston. Tonight, you've heard and will continue to hear a wide range of objections to missing middle housing plan: trees, parking, traffic, pedestrian safety, neighborhood character. But I'd like to take a step back from the policy minutia to remember why we're here in the first place. Between 2010 and 2019, average monthly rent increased 26%, and the average price of a single-family home increased 45%. If we make no major changes to land use, housing prices will continue skyrocketing, and demand outpaces restricted supply. Essential workers, public servants, young families, and retirees will be priced out. But if we open all our residential neighborhoods to gentle density, we can help ensure that Arlington remains accessible to residents of all different income levels, ages, and backgrounds. And affordability isn't the only relevant issue. Denser housing is better for the environment because allowing people to live closer to their jobs reduces polluting car commutes. Denser housing supports walkability, bikeability, and transit. Denser housing preserves tree canopy because by building more housing here, we're absorbing demand that would otherwise lead to clear-cutting land for greenfield subdivisions in Loudoun or Prince William County. Denser housing creates more net property tax revenue per housing unit than single-family homes, which can pay for improving public services, including subsidized and public housing for the most disadvantaged. It is true that this proposal will change the character of Arlington's neighborhoods, but our neighborhood character is already changing, as persistent demand and constrained supply mean more starter homes are getting torn down. We must change our land use policy so that instead of more McMansions, those teardowns have an equal opportunity to become relatively affordable multifamily housing. This plan will not solve our housing crisis completely, but it is an important component of any broader effort to keep Arlington an affordable, inclusive, and sustainable place to live. I urge you to support the most expansive version of the proposal.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Marley Franzen, followed by Mary Ann Shea and Dan Albin and Bill Richardson.
Yeah. Good evening. I'm going to choose to read instead of seeing you clearly. I apologize. Good evening. My name is Marley Franzen. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and this is the second time I've spoken in front of you. Everything everyone loves about Arlington and why everyone is focused on Arlington and not other regional areas is because of decades of detailed planning. The lack of planning and the consideration for what will be needed to support full build-out, not now, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, but full build-out when every single parcel is developed. That lack of planning consideration was needed to support full build-out breaks my heart. Who will pay for the sidewalks, the new schools, the larger stormwater and sewer mains? How many parks will be sacrificed? On page 1 of Phase 1 report, Missing Middle is only about adding housing, not tree canopy, not affordable housing. As a matter of fact, it emphasizes that. It's just about adding housing units, and there are so many ways to solve that problem statement. The most troubling aspect of all of this is that with the unprecedented disagreement in the community, the county leadership has hardly budged on the plan. No one has publicly said, maybe I should reconsider. Maybe there are other options to adding housing. There's just been no option for middle ground. In preparing these remarks, all I keep thinking about is, I know this is a silly, corny kind of example, but I think about the Space Shuttle Challenger and how people tried to throw a flag on the play to stop the launch, but the leadership was so set on moving forward that they refused to pause and act on the feedback. Please have the courage to pause to develop and consider other options. I'm willing to serve on a committee to generate other ideas for additional housing. Thank you very much.
Now I would repeat.
Yeah, repeat.
Okay, great. Next, we have Mary Ann Shea, followed by Dan Albin, Bill Richardson, and Tim Husson. If there's no Mary Ann Shea, then next will be Dan Albin.
Hello and good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I am in support of the most expansive versions of missing middle housing because I have benefited from the missing middle housing that Arlington has currently and know that many others would benefit from it as well. When I first moved here in 2000, right after graduating from college, I moved into a group home on South Fillmore Street. I'm not strictly sure how legal those are these days, but it was certainly a form of dense housing that took advantage of the fact that there are multiple bedrooms in a single family home. After that, when I graduated from law school, I moved into the Colonial Village Apartments, a garden style apartment that remains a landmark in the United States for dense missing middle housing. And then finally, when I got married and decided it was time to buy a home, my wife and I couldn't afford a single family home in Arlington, but we were able to afford a townhome. That was back in 2009, and unfortunately townhomes and other missing middle options have become scarcer and frankly more expensive. We need more missing middle housing in order to meet the increased demand that has occurred. One of the speakers who just spoke asked, who will pay for the sidewalks? Who will pay for the utilities? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. All the new neighbors that are moving into all of these new units, that's who will help pay for all the new sidewalks and all the new utilities. I welcome more neighbors in Arlington. I think what makes Arlington a great place is having more neighbors and having more diverse neighbors and having neighbors live in more diverse forms of housing. Not everyone can afford a single family home, but that doesn't mean they're not worthy of being my neighbor. And I want more neighbors who can live in Arlington and participate in a meaningful way, including by helping to pay for sidewalks, utilities, and schools. Thank you.
Next, we have Bill Richardson, followed by Tim Husson, Merritt Simonson, and Brian Yu.
Thank you. I'm the president of the Donaldson Run Civic Association. In my limited time, I'd like to focus on two of the options that you're going to be recommending about. One is lot coverage, and the other, which I think is tied to that, is the cap figure. I was here before and unsuccessfully suggested, as I have for many more years than Missing Middle has been around, that the county adopt the 2014 Stormwater Management Plan's recommendation to study lot coverage because the 2005 ordinance needs revisiting. I won't get into the details about that. I think everybody on both sides of this issue agrees with that. But in tying Missing Middle to the lot coverage we now have for single-family homes, you're expanding opportunities for the loss of mature trees. Forget about tree canopy in 20 years, stormwater management problems, and the Supreme Court's Euclid decision about, I just don't want a big structure, whether it's a McMansion or a McUnit, next to me looking down on me. That's classic zoning policy. And I would hope that this planning commission should plan a recommendation to resolve that. It should do it before expanding these opportunities, not afterwards. But at a minimum, we should be having that lot coverage study pronto. And the county board advised the planning director to do that study a year ago now. I went to your long-range planning committee meeting virtually, and I understood that there were 21 priority zoning studies that were described to you this past week, none of which had anything to do with Missing Middle. And the second is the cap should not be reduced until you resolve this problem, and the cap should be based on the PES study of 20.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Tim Husson, followed by Merritt Simonson, Brian Yu, and David Girk.
Missing Middle will only meet our goals if it's actually built. That will only happen if the rules are flexible and clear. Therefore, I urge you to recommend options 5C and 9B and no cap. First, option 5C. I urge you to recommend the most flexible parking requirements possible. The people building on a site can best decide how much private parking makes sense. For example, my family owns a single-family home in Maywood. We have 3 drivers, 1 car, and 6 bikes. Requiring off-street parking takes up space that could be used for housing or for trees, and it raises building costs. Second, option 9B consists of 2 edits to the rules on duplexes that are small but essential steps towards clarity and flexibility. The first edit removes the requirement that a duplex have, quote, all exterior characteristics of a one-family attached dwelling, end quote. This is a vague, subjective, and unclear requirement. The second edit removes the inflexible requirement that a duplex have a single front entrance. A friend of mine in Arlington who wanted to build a duplex told me her family decided instead to build a single-family house after her realtor estimated that permits for a duplex would require an extra year because the county's rules for duplexes are so unclear that builders and even county staff struggle to understand what's allowed. Last, no cap. If there's a cap, it will be impossible for the homeowner to know for sure whether they can build an EHO or not. Why invest all the time and expense to design and permit a duplex when you don't know if you can actually build it? If there has to be a cap, it should be high and sunset as soon as possible. In sum, keep the rules flexible and clear. Recommend options 5C and 9B and oppose a cap. Thank you.
Next, we have Merritt Simonson, followed by Brian Yu, David Girk, and Dean Emo, and Eric Berkey.
Hi, my name is Marit Simonson, and I have been living in a single-family home in the Waycroft Woodlawn neighborhood for 22 years. I've raised 3 sons in Arlington, and I work in Arlington Public Schools. And of course, in that time, Arlington has changed and will continue to change, as all communities do. I've seen neighbors come and go, schools be expanded, schools torn down, new schools built. Arlington Hospital build an 8th-floor addition, become Virginia Hospital Center. I've seen mid-century houses get torn down, large modern homes take their place. I've seen our trees come down to accommodate houses so large that it seems like 3 or 4 families could live in them. These are all changes that already have and are happening in our neighborhoods. Change is uncomfortable and difficult to get used to, but it is part of life. Arlington is going to change. What we as citizens, planning commission members, and county board members need to decide is how we want to change. Should the only redevelopment we allow be the replacement of our modest homes with oversized luxury houses? Or do we want to change zoning to accommodate housing for more people who work in our county? Do we want to change zoning to accommodate smaller units that are less expensive and thereby invite more diversity into our community? Do we want to change zoning that was based on racist ideology? I say yes. Please choose the most expansive options. Thank you for your time and service.
Next is Brian Yu, followed by David Girk and Dean Amo.
Good evening. I appreciate all the commission's and the staff's efforts to bring the missing middle housing proposal to this point, and I trust the commission comprehends the value of the proposal overall. So I'd like to address the narrower subject of parking and express my support of option 5C related to it. Adopting the 5A minimum parking requirement within proximity of transit, rather than allowing the flexibility of consideration of the individual site, will in cases thwart the creation of viable homes and require more impermeable surface than is necessary. The disastrous costs in our society that the false precision of parking minimums has already imposed to numerous activities and aspects of daily life are incalculable but well known. And I question what value there is in imposing one more. Especially among younger age cohorts, people are starting to get good at alternatives to car ownership, and this shouldn't be discouraged. In fact, the sustainable future rests on fewer cars per person and household because there actually isn't enough lithium in the ground to replace all of the existing gas cars one-to-one with electric ones. Ride sharing is old news. E-bikes and personally owned e-scooters are gaining wider adoption, and Arlington has done a better job than a lot of major cities at getting buy-in on short-term car rentals car rental use of street-side spaces, which I've personally enjoyed using many times. And let's not forget that street-side parking in less dense areas is public property too. So I think that's the kind of thing that's worth expanding rather than imposing another cost on the community and passing another subsidy from other modes to driving. Thank you.
Next, we have David Girk, followed by Dean Amel, Eric Berkey, Fazia Dean, and Gail Perry.
Good evening. I'm David Girk, an Arlingtonian since 2002. I'm an attorney and an engineer, and I have 2 girls aged 5 and 2. I'm speaking for AFUT. Before getting further, I do want to address what I believe are some misstatements by earlier speakers. While we all strongly disapprove of certain past practices in the U.S., these proposed amendments have nothing to do with race, affordability, or the past. Single-family zoning in Arlington is not preventing teachers or firefighters or people of color from owning homes in Arlington. It's the cost. The cheapest EPO unit in a 6-unit building will require an annual income of at least $174,000. New types of people won't be moving in, just more of the same high-income folks. Turning back to what I wanted to address tonight, Arlington continues to approve density and upzoning first, delaying all meaningful planning until after the fact. The missing middle EPO upzoning options are no exception. The refusal to plan in advance before approving significant land use changes has brought us a precipitous decline in tree canopy, dropping from 41% in 2016 down to 33% in 2021. Heat trapping, water shedding, impervious surface growth of 2% in just 5 years. An antiquated water distribution and sanitary sewer system, an electric grid that is on life support, an antiquated stormwater management system, unable to cope with growing storm runoff, fueled by increasing imperviousness and loss of tree canopy. Schools with a permanent supply of trailer classrooms without which most would be over-enrolled. So we ask the Planning Commission to live up to its name, withhold the decision to recommend any options, and defer any decision on the proposed amendments to the GLUP and the zoning ordinance, and ask the board to do the same until there's an analysis.
Thank you. Now, next we have Dean Amel, followed by Eric Berkey, Fazia Dean, and Gail Perry. Thank you. I paused your time, so you're good now.
Okay. Should I start over or should I just keep going?
Your time starts now.
Okay. The Sierra Club's Potomac River Group supports a broad missing middle framework with 6 plexes throughout Arlington, minimal parking requirements, and no limits on annual permits, because such an expanded housing policy would benefit the environment. Dealing with an expanding population and a growing workforce through denser development has many environmental benefits compared to the alternative, which is greater sprawl in the outer suburbs. Reductions in long car-based commutes, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollution. Housing with shared walls is, in general, more energy efficient than single-family housing, producing additional improvements in air quality. The County Board's actions in January greatly reduced concerns that missing middle housing could harm tree canopy. Positions on other options in the staff report are contained in our letter to you dated March 3rd. While missing middle would have positive environmental effects, this is not the central aim of the policy. The central goal is to increase the provision of housing in Arlington. Because I have a PhD in economics and spent a career studying local geographic markets, I'd like to address the effects of this policy on the housing market. Some have stated that by increasing the supply of housing in Arlington, we could, perversely, raise the price of housing above what it otherwise would have been, because multi-unit housing will be the highest market value use of single-family lots in Arlington, and an increase in land values will drive affordable housing from Arlington. This argument ignores our recent experience, with an average of 170 houses raised each year and replaced by massive single-family houses. Under current zoning, such McMansions are the highest market value use of single-family lots. Our policy choice is between missing middle units and massive single-family houses that commonly sell for much more than the expected price of one unit in multi-unit housing. As is true in almost any market, increasing the supply of housing in Arlington will reduce the price. Thank you.
Next, we have Eric Berkey, followed by Gail Perry and Jane Green.
Hey, good evening. I'm Eric Berkey. I live in Douglas Park. The privilege of being the Housing Commission Chair the last 3 years here, so it's good to see everybody. I'm here to support the most robust EHO zoning amendments, not just to offer the most attainable zoning options for the next several generations of Arlingtonians, but because what we're doing right now is very much impacted by our past, where people can live and the types of housing that we offer. And it absolutely will impact the next several generations of our kids. So what I'm asking tonight is there's a lot of recommendations folks have proposed, but I'm specifically speaking to options 1A is an attainable, and option 2A, as option 2A would replicate the same site standards for each district for EHOs as exists for single family homes. 1A would allow EHOs up to 6 plexes. Option 2E, which was added in the RTA, 2E is an exclusionary, imposes onerous lot requirements and transit requirements, is unsupported by any staff analysis, and really is practically anti-housing. It's not a sustainable option. It really would only put this missing middle housing plan on a path to providing greater housing choice in name only. There's been a lot of discussion of affordable housing. EHOs are not affordable housing, and I can tell you, as having been in that lane for 6-7 years now in the Housing Commission, we're talking about attainable housing for folks who are making 120% of area median income, which are a lot of Arlingtonians for the next several generations. So really what we're asking for you to do is to recommend a start to provide more housing that is attainable. It's not going to solve all of our housing issues, but it is certainly a start with no cost to the county government. Thanks.
Next, we have Gail Perry, followed by Jane Green and Jason Schwartz.
Good evening. My name is Gail Perry. I have lived in Arlington as a homeowner for 28 years. I'm a retired APS teacher, and my son graduated from Wakefield High School. I am here today to express my support for the missing middle action that would end exclusionary zoning, the origin of which is rooted in historic racism and is still operational. Arlington County promotes itself as a progressive place to live, work, and open to all. In contrast, the county's continued operation of exclusionary policies, especially related to affordable housing, is pushing out families with lower incomes and those of color who have little or no public voice or power in the political process. In September 2019, Arlington County Board unanimously adopted a resolution to address racial equity. Arlington has a very long history of racial oppression that adversely impacts people of color, especially African American and Latin families. With the board's release of this resolution, there appeared to be a documented commitment to address this long history and its resultant systemic disparities that people of color continue to experience, starting with affordable housing and public education. As the board continues to debate and modify the missing middle housing proposal to accommodate the powerful voices in the county, the needs of those who have no power continue to be minimized. The Planning Commission is in a powerful position to remove exclusionary ordinance with no exception. I support the construction of up to 6 family units in any dwelling anywhere in the county where there is land available. If this county considers itself to be progressive, urban community moving into the future, then I'm committed to
Next, we have Jane Green, followed by Jason Schwartz, Joseph Keys and Joshua Handler.
Is it on? Okay, hey, very, very good. Great. The first general land use plan issued in 1961, the low residential area were pegged at 1 or 0 to 8 units per acre. More than 60 years later, this density designation has not changed. Nearly all of Arlington's population growth has occurred within the narrow transit corridors. The rest of our land is frozen in time, except the prices keep going up. A new single-family home now averages $2 million. Our smart growth policies bring thousands of new residents to high-density corridors. We are the economic engine of the county. But when my friends look for something a little bigger, they are forced out to Fairfax, Loudoun, or Prince William. The principles of good planning call on us to gradually increase density to match this demand. All of Arlington has better transit access than most of the places where my neighbors move to. To make the expanded housing options zoning reforms the most sustainable, equitable, and attainable that they can be, I ask that you recommend option 2A that will allow dwellings of up to 6 units on all lots. I also ask that you recommend option 4B to give EHO homes more flexibility in their lot coverage with space for people rather than cars. Please recommend that the county board adopt this policy without delay. When Arlington implemented exclusionary zoning, no one asked if it was equitable, if it protected our environment, or if it gave us affordable homes. We know it has done the opposite on every front. Ending exclusionary zoning won't undo past wrongs, but the status quo is a choice that we cannot continue to make. Thank you.
Next, we have Jason Schwartz, followed by Joseph Keys and Joshua Handler.
Hi, I'm Jason and I live in Arlington. We need more homes, not more parking. Pre-pandemic, RPP areas had occupancies below 50% on average, which is over 20 acres of empty parking. It's clear that in Arlington, residential on-street parking in single-family neighborhoods is underutilized, despite being heavily subsidized below market value. 93 to 98% of transit-proximate residential sites are underutilized. RPP sites are 99% underutilized. Parking is even more underutilized today than compared to pre-pandemic. In the spring of 2022, the Clarendon, Virginia Square, Columbia Pike, Virginia Hospital Center, and Richmond Highway RPP areas had mean occupancies ranging from 19 to 44%. Research shows households with constrained off-street parking drive fewer miles. We need to stop mandating parking to break the cycle of automobile dependency. Many people choose to park on public streets to free up space in their private garages and driveways. The use of on-street residential parking space relates more to household choices, entitlements, and asserted rights than it does to adequate off-street parking or to higher density housing. Arlington is falling behind on parking best practices. Many localities across North America have eliminated all parking minimums, including Cambridge, Massachusetts, Culver City, California, and the sprawling Raleigh, North Carolina. It's unfair to have places where parking is free for cars and housing is expensive for people. I urge the Planning Commission to recommend options 5C and 5E. Thank you very much.
Next is Joseph Keys, followed by Joshua Handler and Katie Wenger.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Keys. I first came to live in Arlington in 1967 as a young naval officer just returned from a tour in Vietnam. The following year, I was pleased to be able to purchase a home in Arlington for my new bride and me. The saved up combat duty helped, but it still seemed enormously expensive, the price being almost 5 times the cost of the house when it was built some 25 years earlier. I wasn't sure that I'd ever recover the total cost if we had to move. We could have gotten more house for the money if we moved further out, but I wanted to live in Arlington, close to my work at the Bureau of Naval Personnel. At closing, I was chagrined to learn that the deed had a restrictive covenant in it. Though I was quickly reassured that it was unenforceable, I somehow felt guilty of complicity in an oppressive system. I was later to learn how comprehensive this oppressive system was, with banks redlining neighborhoods and reinforced by federal policy regarding bank regulation and loan guarantees. This systemic racial segregation and separation was also reinforced by zoning regulations that restricted over 70% of the land zoned for housing to single-family dwellings, making housing unaffordable to many. In Arlington, as in much of the nation, zoning is an equity issue as well as a housing issue. Arlington needs more housing. Affordable housing, yes, but simply more housing generally. I support Arlington's laudable efforts to increase affordable housing and the nonprofit organizations that have sprung up representing Arlington citizens' efforts to make housing affordable. Reducing zoning restrictions will not in itself make housing affordable, but it promises to make more housing available at different price points, which makes it attainable for more people. I urge you to recommend the most unrestrictive policy going forward.
Next is Joshua Handler, followed by Katie Wenger, Katie Irene St. Marie, and McCoy Kaufman.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good evening. My name is Joshua Handler, and I've lived in Arlington since 2007. I'm going to summarize to you some of the points I made in the email earlier today to you. There's an urgent need for the Planning Commission to do some planning and delay voting on, or at least putting off, the implementation of the EHO proposal until its comprehensive impacts on infrastructure, schools, emergency response, utilities, roadways, and environment can be better understood. For example, on traffic, I attended the Transportation Commission's March 2nd meeting and discovered the Commission had not conducted a comprehensive review of the impact of the EHO proposal on traffic in Arlington. Worse, they seemed unfamiliar with a variety of neighborhood configurations in Arlington. Some newer neighborhoods like ours have limited access to points on arterials, or have schools or parks or businesses that attract cut-through traffic or additional traffic to attend events or for school. Older neighborhoods may have narrower streets, no sidewalks, or already a crowded parking situation. Yet others will be even farther from arterials, adding more traffic to more streets in Arlington. For different but still substantial reasons, having even a few sixplexes, let alone more fourplexes, triplexes, or duplexes, could materially worsen the traffic and safety situation of a given neighborhood. Overall, the Transportation Commission meeting conveyed to me a significant lack of examination and planning for further densification of our already densely populated county on the part of the county staff and some county commissions. The Planning Commission should put a foot on the brake until some real planning can be done and a comparative need for EHO to other housing assistance programs in Arlington, such as the Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Program, can be established. Or it could recommend dropping an EHO proposal that really has no practical purpose, as somebody mentioned earlier, will not provide affordable housing, and not even to say attainable housing for a majority of Arlingtonians, and will likely have a number of negative impacts. Absent that, the potential for negative impacts should be studied more carefully so we can plan for them before making a drastic countywide change in zoning. At minimum, the various options in the staff report that keep AHOs limited in numbers, size, and location should be endorsed to keep negative impact.
Next is Katie Wenger, followed by Katie Irene St. Marie, Meg Tucillo? Tucillo. Sorry.
Hi, thank you for your time tonight and for your service. My name is Katie Wenger, and I live in Virginia Square. I love living in Arlington because of the walkability, public transportation, and wonderful opportunities to get involved in the community. I would love to live here long term, but unfortunately, when the time comes to buy a home, I doubt that I will be able to afford to buy one in Arlington. So many of the young adults and immigrant families I talk to have the same dreams of being able to buy a home here, and the same sad realization that they probably will not be able to. My friends and I want to see people from all types of professions, races, ethnicities, and ages to be able to enjoy the amazing community in Arlington and contribute to that community. This is why we ask that you take this historic opportunity to remove the restrictions from Arlington's zoning policy and make Arlington's neighborhoods accessible to more types of residents. To give developers the most flexibility to accomplish this goal, we ask you to vote for options 2A, 4B, 5C, 7B, 10B, and 11B. Other regions across the DMV and the entire country are watching Arlington, and you have an amazing chance to do the right thing for a more inclusive community. Thank you.
Next is Katie Irene St. Marie, Meg Tucillo, Richard Engel, Sarah Mitchell, and Barbara Robin.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you. My name is Katie Irene St. Marie, and I support the most expansive plan of 5 and 6 plexes in Arlington. My family of 7 moved to Arlington in the 1960s, and we rented an apartment while searching for a house. Once a suitable house was found, the realtor said to my father, "By law, I must tell you there is a Negro family next door." By law. That was the law of the land. I must tell you there is a Negro family. What was that about? Why? That still lives in me. And all these generations later, I think it's not only affected our Black and other people of color neighbors, but all of us. We're all poorer for having to be separated from one another. And there's no way to go back and erase that law, but there is a way to go forward and make a new law that helps us to be neighbors. Once again, I'm a single, middle-aged person that doesn't make a lot of money. I can't really afford to live in Arlington, although I'm in a place in Halls Hill now, which is a historic neighborhood, although it doesn't look like many of the historic neighborhoods I've seen in my life. I just want to say that I do support the missing middle, and I hope you will too. Thank you.
Next, we have Meg Tusillo, and then Richard Engel.
We got it. Good evening, Meg Tusillo. Thank you. You made it easy to prepare for tonight's speech because you provided the words. Your equity statement of 2020 truly has words to live by, such as, public officials and political institutions must consistently choose to specifically and deliberately question and work against systemic inequities, or they will inevitably and necessarily adopt policies shaped by them. And, you said, we are committed to making Arlington's land use laws and policies equitable for all Arlingtonians and to support efforts to bring diverse voices to our processes. So, just do what you said you would do. Just be who you said you would be. And just act as you said you would act. For it is just the right thing to do, to recommend the highest level of housing opportunities across Arlington. And in my remaining time, I saw signs that said no school crowding. As the retired assistant superintendent of schools for Arlington for 17 years, I need to tell you that we dealt with enrollment growth for those 17 years with boundary changes, with repurposing existing buildings into schools, and a whole range of other solutions that will happen with or without missing middle. So please, let's not worry about that. Thank you.
Next is Richard Engel, followed by Sarah Mitchell, Barbara Rovin, and Margie Bell.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Richard Engel. I've lived here since 1976, 4 different neighborhoods, started off in Barcroft Apartments. But I'd like to mention to you is the fact that I spent 10 years on site plan review, 1985 to 95. It was a really interesting time. I personally reviewed over 6 million square feet of development. Now, why do I mention this? Very simple reason is that I always made it a point to visit every single project that came up before us, to look at the site conditions, to look at the streets, to look at the curb cuts, to look at the trees, to look at the neighborhood houses. The whole point here is that you really don't know what you don't know until you go out and look at conditions on the ground. And I think what concerns me here tonight is that we have a very radical proposal to change zoning. And I'm not going to talk about the merits of that, but I think what's really important is to insist that this be done on a use permit process. I don't think that's overly expensive. I don't think it's overly time-consuming, but I think it's very, very important for the residents in all the affected communities, those who are in favor of increased density, those who are in favor of not or opposed to it, those who live there, those from outside the area, to actually look at how each of these projects would affect the neighborhoods in which they're going to be built. I think that's something that we don't see, and we just don't know what we're getting into until we see those conditions. I think of all the parking garages I parked in where the spaces looked big until you got on them inside and you found you couldn't park your cars, even a small car there. You found that the buildings loomed more than you thought they would. Some buildings look better than you thought they would based on their neighborhood context. So I think with something this radical, it's really important for us to give the citizens, give the Planning Commission, give the Transportation Commission and the County Board the opportunity to actually look at these projects and vote on them individually until we have some sense of how they're really going to work. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Sarah Mitchell, followed by Barbara Revin, Margie Bell, and Kathleen Harrison.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I grew up in Vienna, Virginia, and I've lived in Arlington County since 2019. I don't have a car. I hope to never have a car, let alone two. So it's important for me to be along the orange line or blue line so that I can commute into DC for work and also be able to visit my parents who are still in Vienna. For someone without a car, that means that the walkability and density of Arlington allows me to keep pretty much all of my dollars here in Arlington County, in grocery stores, regular stores, restaurants, bars, things like that. In January, I began a Master of Social Work program at George Mason, and I would love to eventually serve Arlington residents as a licensed clinical social worker and as a therapist and continue to live here while doing that. I think you all are aware of the desperate need for more behavioral health professionals in our region, and I would really like to be a part of that solution where I live. But I will be eventually taking a pay cut to become a therapist. I'll also have student loans, so both of those compounded together means I am essentially budgeting and planning to have to be priced out of Arlington in a couple of years and find somewhere else to put down roots as I begin practicing. And likely my next, wherever I'm able to be, would be my permanent roots, ideally. So that'll have to be somewhere that's affordable for the middle like me, and I want that to be able to be Arlington. So many Arlington residents are priced out the minute that we make these meaningful changes to our lives, that we become parents, that we become caretakers, things like that. And these life changes should be celebrated where we live, but instead we get priced out of the community that we love so much. I ask you to please move forward a bold missing middle plan that will eventually make a difference in inventory and pricing, and so that means 6 pluses without restrictions and also permits without caps. A more expansive plan like that will give us more flexibility and options, and that's going to help us stay in the county that either people have grown up in and want to stay in, or people like me have grown to love. Thanks.
Our next speakers are Barbara Revin, Margie Bell, Kathleen Harrison, and Ann Bodine.
Hi, my name is Barbara Rovin, and I'm speaking in support of the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance and the general land use plan. I grew up in Arlington in the 50s and 60s. I raised my children here, and I now live here as a retired single woman. I wish my grandson was going to grow up here, but unfortunately, their family could not find a good option. In fact, I've been a homeowner in North Arlington and a tenant in South Arlington, as I said. In fact, I've lived in 5 of Arlington's zip codes, so you know that I've seen a lot of change. Maybe the most impactful was the siting and construction of I-66 and Metro through the county. That process of planning and rejection and approval changes took decades, but in the long run, the struggle was worth it. Just imagine if this community had not been brave enough to take that step. Just think what Arlington would be like now, not the way it is. Other changes I can mention: more public parks, community centers, recreation facilities, open space, public space, transportation options, new and revitalized urban areas. You have to make changes to get the benefit of all those things. In my opinion, Arlington has been guided through these years by a very professional staff and dedicated county officials. I trust your work, and I continue to support you. Now we're faced with the problem of housing supply, the gap of middle housing that we've talked about. We're not the only community in this in this area who's had this problem. What we need now is zoning that allows for broader options through higher density. We need to say yes to this policy.
Thank you. Margie Bell, Kathleen Harrison, Ann Bodine, Samuel Leon, and Jennifer Huckabee.
Hi, I'm Margie Bell, and I've been an Arlington resident since 1976, and I urge you to vote no and stop this troubling zoning proposal. This commission is supposed to advise the county board on development and its impact on the community, but the commission has not been invited to do so, nor have you used your authority to do so. Each of you will be approving a parade of terrible impacts if you vote to move this forward. Each of you, charged to represent the community, are deciding right now whether to recommend zoning changes that will cut the tree canopy standard in half for 97% of rezoned areas, cut 34,000 trees, eliminating greater than 9 Pentagon parking lots of trees, increase storm runoff by at least 480,000 cubic feet per year, Westover flooding on steroids, increase carbon emissions by 99 tons per year, add more trailers, classrooms to already existing 123 classrooms that are trailers today, increase the percentage of all Arlington schools that are at or above capacity, and currently that number is already 45%. Snarl us with indisputable parking, traffic, and trash congestions that results from turning one household into 6, multiplied many times over. This plan ignores low and middle income earners, driving them out. Housing in the cheapest foreseeable unit, a condo in the 6-unit building, will necessitate earnings of $174,000 or more. The community is looking to you as representatives for a better plan for our future.
Thank you for your comments.
All right, thank you.
Our next speaker is Kathleen Harrison, Ann Bodine, Samuel Leon, and Jennifer Huckabee. Okay. The next 5 is Ann Bodine, Samuel Leon, Jennifer Huckabee, and Sasha Ramina.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Ann Bodine of Lyon Park. This missing middle plan opens a Pandora's box. Even duplexes double the population in the R zones. And yet we seem poised to go for the extreme of 6plexes, taking our hands off the rudder and subjecting a large chunk of our territory only to the whims of the market. And we have no plans for new infrastructure and no funds. The new zoning drafts violate several elements of our comp plan, including the general land use plan. If 6plexes are approved, Lyon Park goes from 7 to 43 units per acre zoned, violating the GLUP's low residential density category. The plan also violates GLUP's Goal 4 to preserve and enhance single-family areas. Comp plan violations should ring alarm bells with your commission. The plan implies that Arlington has a housing shortage for the income groups being served by missing middle, or that we are not meeting our regional 2019 MCOG housing production goals. In fact, a 2021 report by a nonprofit said Arlington exceeded the number of units it needed to produce for the last 3 years, and the county's home housing director said the market was meeting demand. Missing middle proponents have promised diversity and affordability with no supporting research or data. In fact, census data and county projections show even the 8plexes would have been far out of reach for Arlington's median Black, Hispanic, and senior households. Missing middle zoning is already gentrifying Green Valley. Rather than citing other data or discussing ours, missing middle advocates have resorted to insults. This process has left us polarized and unable to advance more pressing housing goals, meeting the needs of our lowest income groups below 50% of AMI. I ask today that you cap missing middle at a maximum of 3 units, incentivize them near transit, and that you recommend the board include 5, 10, and 15-year reporting on age, race, ethnicity, disability, and area median incomes of missing middle residents, as per a document I sent earlier. I warned about delays at Penn Place with my testimony in April, and that same foresight infuses my call today for more thoughtful planning, less slapdash density, and a compromise. Thank you.
Next speaker is Samuel Leon, Jennifer Huckabee, Sasha Romani, Richard Epstein, Brooke Alexander.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sam Leone, and I'm a resident of Clarendon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight. I've come to urge you to support the most ambitious of the missing middle housing options under consideration. By right sixplexes in all residential zoning districts, no development caps, and flexibility in terms of lot area, site area, and other requirements. The research is clear that the cause of our affordability crisis is laws blocking new construction, and that liberalizing land use policies has 3 enormous benefits. First, increasing housing supply really does decrease rental prices. If we force the number of units to stay fixed, then new residents compete with existing residents, bid up prices, and drive people from their homes. But if we let the number of units grow, then we can prevent this dynamic and ensure affordability. In fact, multiple rigorous studies show that new housing developments can lower nearby rents by up to 7% and displacement by up to 17%. Second, more housing gives a boost to the economy. Folks across the world would love to move to Arlington, and by making housing more abundant, we make it easier for them to do so. That's good for the movers themselves, for their new employers, for local businesses who get new customers, and for the county's tax revenues. Third, dense infill housing is a tool in the fight against climate change because, among other things, it gives people access to public transit. President Obama once said that, quote, "We can work together to break down rules that stand in the way of building new housing and that keep families from moving to growing, dynamic cities." By embracing missing middle housing, that's exactly what you'd be doing. Thank you.
Our next speakers are Jennifer Huckabee, Sasha Romani, Richard Epstein, Brooke Alexander, and Andreas Elteridge.
Thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about myself and why voting yes for the missing middle plan and including sixplexes without restrictions is imperative. I do not see a future for myself in Arlington where I can purchase a home. I am a 38-year-old single woman who has lived and worked in Arlington for the last 15 years. I currently live in a duplex, which is missing middle, and I've rented that for 12 years. I have chosen Arlington as my community and want to stay here and contribute for as long as possible. I don't have a partner to share a financial burden of homeownership, thus I'm unable to achieve financial stability and comes along with home ownership despite a well-paying job and renting for the last 12 years. Voting yes for the missing middle plan, including sixplexes without restriction, is the way to offer home ownership to people like me. I should be able to purchase a home in a community I love, support, and contribute to daily. Voting yes for missing middle plan and including sixplexes without restrictions is a way for Arlington to fill its obligation to its community, to the people that live and work here, that support its industry and keep it clean and safe. If we want to truly build a community here, we should start by building a plan and a path for home ownership that is actually achievable for all people. Voting yes for the missing middle plan and including sixplexes without restrictions is the only option. Thank you so much for your time, and you're almost done, I think. Thank you.
Sasha Romani, Richard Epstein, Brooke Alexander, and Andreas Elteridge.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you so much for your time this evening. My name is Sasha Romani, and I have the honor of being a resident and property owner here in Arlington. I love Arlington for its safe, walkable streets and excellent public transportation. I don't have a car, and I hope to never have a car for as long as I live in Arlington. And accordingly, I am here to support the most expansive version of the missing middle plan and upzoning. That means sixplexes with no caps and no minimum parking requirements. As we've heard discussed here, the current exclusionary zoning that unfortunately pervades Arlington has its origins in racial segregation and leads to an artificially inflated price of housing and therefore rent in Arlington County. I implore you commissioners to allow denser development that is more sustainable in the long run to deal with our climate crisis. I implore you to allow homes that are more attainable for more families and that fit more sizes and more types of families. Accordingly, I implore you to please support proposals 2A, 4B, 5C, 7B, 10B, and 11B as well. Finally, there's a point behind my shoulder that says to let Arlingtonians decide. Considering about 90% of people who have been here at this booth today have favored upzoning and missing middle housing, I think Arlingtonians have decided. Thank you.
Richard Epstein, Brooke Alexander, Andreas Elteridge.
Good evening. My name is Rick Epstein and I live in Arlington Forest. I am opposed to these proposed zoning amendments. Former Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart famously quipped that he may not be able to define obscenity, but he knows it when he sees it. I will not presume to define political legitimacy, but I think that I and thousands of other Arlingtonians know what it is and know that it is missing from these missing middle zoning amendments. Why do I say this? The upzoning of single-family neighborhoods has been the predetermined outcome from day one of a seriously flawed public engagement process. Ironically, since the publishing of the Missing Middle Framework, a majority of public engagement participants have opposed this plan. In a representative government, how is it legitimate to impose this plan over the expressed wishes of at least half of the participants in the county's own public engagement process? And from a policy viewpoint, this has truly been an initiative in desperate search of a compelling justification, with shifting goals and messaging. County staff no longer claims affordability and diversity as primary goals because this plan will not create either. Staff now says instead that we need increased housing numbers and types, even as our acknowledged most urgent housing need is more affordable housing, which this plan will not produce. There is no broad consensus in our community for this policy. If imposed from the top down, it will confirm to many that our political process is truly not representative of our community. We will be left with a dramatically divided community and a damaged political process. Justice Stewart made another relevant observation. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. What is right to do here is to recommend against this proposal. But if a majority of you cannot see your way to do that, for the sake of our collective political future, recommend the least negatively impactful of the proposed options, including an annual cap of 20 units with the longest duration possible.
Brooke Alexander and Andreas Elteridge.
I have a Master's of Land Use and Environmental Planning from UVA. The land use attorneys who taught my land use courses would urge me to declare that I am not an attorney. So please note that. I think that Arlington should have gone back to the drawing board when it was clear that the original objectives were unattainable with zoning changes. That being said, if you decide to recommend approval of the RTA, I urge you to also recommend reducing the lot coverage allowed. Recommend with your RTA approval that the county board follow up quickly with a study to comprehensively reduce the lot coverage. A reduction in lot coverage will leave more space for our tree canopy and reduce the severity of stormwater runoff, while allowing more development, which our elected officials seem intent on. Reduction of the allowed lot coverage is important to retaining our quality of life in Arlington. I assure you that downzoning is legal in Virginia if, 1, it is done comprehensively, and 2, if it is tied to a reasonable rationale. The reasonable rationale is that we need more pervious surface for our tree canopy and to reduce stormwater runoff. If the county attorney recommends against an across-the-board decrease in lot coverage, as not viable because it will not hold up in court, I urge the Planning Commission to recommend hiring a legal consultant with the appropriate expertise to guide the county process so it will not go to court. Thank you.
Okay. Our final speaker for the evening is Andreas Elteridge.
Hello, I'm Andreas Elteridge. I'm last. I'll be quick. Growing up in the United States, we were led to believe that working hard will lead to great economic success. And I just have one question, I guess, tonight, and it's how much longer are we going to allow the exclusion of the next generation from this American dream? I really believe that we should legalize the increase of the housing supply as quickly as possible to allow young hard workers to own houses and create families and bring their life to Arlington. Thank you so much for spending so much time here, and yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for speaking tonight in person. We will adjourn until Wednesday, March 8th, at which time we will reconvene, hear our virtual speakers, and then the commission will jump into deliberations on this last item for March. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your time and attention. This commission stands adjourned. Recessed. We're in recess.